What part of California are you in?
So I'm in Inland Empire, San Bernardino area, kind of in between. It's like an hour inland from like LA and the West Coast, not quite out to Palm Springs. So it's like we're in the desert, but we're right next to it's like the mountains have a lot of snow on them right now. So we're kind of in between everything. This is where I used to live. I lived here for like 15 years, and me and my wife just moved to Texas like year and a half ago. So we're out for a buddy's wedding. So I'm a little jet lagged. I'm trying to get caffeinated up right now, man. But yeah, I'm trying to knock the rust off.
Yeah, no, I know it's early for you because it's only 9 a.m. over there. But see,
Yeah.
I gotta go out to Sacramento in about a month here to go on Mark Bell's show. So I got that coming up. So I haven't been
Okay.
out in California in 5 years.
Yeah. No, it's cool up there. Like Northern California, it's beautiful. I mean, there's a lot. I don't want to get into California politics and stuff, but there's it's a cool place to visit. But I mean, me and my wife went to regionals for a strongman show last year, and it was up by San Francisco. And it's like this most stupidly beautiful place you could ever go to. It looks like a storybook. And then you drive through, and there's just like shit's broken into. They told us at the rental car agency, they're like, don't leave your stuff in the car because we're getting cars coming back with the windows busted out. It's like known. It's like, oh, well, people will probably steal your shit. So just be careful. It's crazy. It's like living in a different.
Well, yeah,
Anyways, that's my.
no, when we
What's
were up
that?
there in San Francisco, like we were driving in downtown San Francisco, and we were driving. I hear all these sirens and everything. I look up, and it says Tenderloin District. I'm like, well, there you go. The Tenderloin District is like the worst part of San Francisco as far as the homeless problem and the crime and all that. But San Francisco is awesome. It's as far as the Golden Gate Bridge, the
Oh, it's
beauty of the.
beautiful. Yeah.
It's just more the politics of it and such. I get it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But it's a great place to visit, man.
Yeah, and in Sacramento, the other thing I'm going to try to do when I'm up there is go to Tahoe because it's like 2 hour drive. Have you ever been there?
Yeah, yeah. When I was a kid, I've been up there.
You like it? Is it pretty nice?
I was young. I mean, we went there. My brother was like big into snowboarding, so we went there for a resort. I mean the ski resorts were beautiful. I don't remember anything about the city or anything else, so I can't comment on that. But I believe it's a nice area. I think.
Yeah, just always exploring. I don't know. I haven't been to that area in a while, so I figure we'll go check it out. Now, why'd you move to Texas, and where are you at in Texas?
I'm in San Antonio. Yeah, we moved out because we were trying to have a family, and it's just too expensive. Me and my wife both make pretty good money. We couldn't afford to get a house. We put an offer in. It was like $380,000 for like 1,000 square foot house. It was so, and it's not like we're in the fucking Pacific Palisades out here. We're in like San Bernardino. Like it's not a great area. So we just looked around, and we had like 3 or 4 friends. Like my wife had a childhood friend move out there. We had 2 different members from my gym move out to Austin. And then one night we're on our balcony in our apartment drinking, and our buddy starts sending us listings off Redfin. And he's like, hey, check out these houses. And our jaws hit the floor. Like we couldn't believe what you could get for the same amount of money. So it feels like we went up like 3 income brackets just moving out of the state. So now we can afford to have a house. We're going through like IVF, trying to have a kid right now. So we can afford to do these things. We couldn't do them here.
Well, that's how Tennessee is. Tennessee is almost like Texas light because also no state income tax. It's
Mm-hmm.
much cheaper cost of living. I train guys at my gym, and I see tons of people all the time who have moved from California because they go, we couldn't get this size of house out there, not even close. So the cost
Yeah.
of living is much better. And I mean, I think you see that a lot of times in like the red states, obviously.
Is
But
that where you're out? You're in Tennessee?
yeah, so like I'm in just outside of Knoxville. I'm in Oak Ridge.
Okay.
Really like it. I've lived here for 7 years. Absolutely love it. Moved here from Wisconsin. That's what made it an easy drive up to Dave's place. It was just like a 6 hour drive. It wasn't bad at all, but I love it here. And it's interesting you said that about IBF. So how old are you right now?
36.
Okay, so I'm about to be 32 in a couple months. And do you have any kids currently?
No, we don't.
So this will be the first one. Yeah, because I just went through all that. Like that's why I came off originally. And my daughter's now, she's gonna be like a year old in 2 weeks. It's kind of crazy.
Oh, congrats, man. That's cool.
Yeah, so it's just I relate to you so much with that because it was, it's a bit of
That
a process.
Oh, it's a roller coaster, and the first one didn't take. But it's like now we have the lay of the land, so it's like we're going through it again. So it's an emotional roller coaster, but at least we know what to get into now, what to expect, because it's really disorienting in the beginning. But no, I heard that about Tennessee too. I think that's a state a lot of people don't think about. Usually doesn't get brought up in the discussion, but I hear like Nashville is like crazy growing from all the people that are dumping out of these other states. And I'm happy to see it, because it's like if a state doesn't function well, why would people stick around if the state isn't built to work? So yeah, I've been meaning to get out and explore that way, because I hear it's beautiful up there too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think you made a good choice though. Texas is another place where having a family is going to be a good place.
Oh, it's San Antonio is fantastic. It's like it's a small, dense city, but everything's super close together. And it's you get outside of the circle, and it's like you're out in the country. So it's like a good mix. Like our neighborhood feels like it's in the forest, but we're like a mile away from the shopping center, and it's like the perfect balance. Only thing I don't like, we're allergic to everything out there. San Antonio has like the worst pollen in the country or something like that. So I don't know if you saw it on when I was on Table Talk. I look like I have rosacea. Like my skin has never been like that bright red patches on my face. 100% the allergies from San Antonio weather. It's ridiculous out there.
Dude, that's crazy because the pollen, we have it really bad here too. One year, like a couple years ago, we were ranked ninth worst city, Knoxville area. And now it's like 30th, but the pollen is brutal. It'll rain and it stirs it all up. And I'm sneezing all day. Way worse than Wisconsin, the pollen here. And it's funny you say that too, because I've had like rosacea, I feel like for my whole life, where I'll get the redness right here, it dries out. Just this right around my nose, it turns like pink and red and the skin flakes off. So that's wild. I wonder if that's kind of related or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I lived in the Midwest. I lived in Illinois when I was younger, and I remember around spring, I would get allergies, but I just get a runny nose. I get a scratchy throat. Nothing, nothing. I've lived 35 years without experiencing this. I'm like, I feel like the state's telling me to get the fuck out.
Well, is that where you grew up? Is that where you were born?
No, I grew up I was born in San Diego. We moved around a lot.
Okay, you said California, but
yeah, I was born in San Diego, but we moved around a lot. We lived in West Virginia for a little bit. We lived in Tennessee for like 6 months. I was too young to remember that though. I went to high school in Illinois, and then I finished high school back in California, and then that's when me and my mom moved up to like San Bernardino area.
So where's the favorite place that you've lived out of those?
Oh man, it's hard because I look at places like as a kid. The places I liked. I really loved West Virginia because I just remember the hills. I remember the snow. I love the snow. I love the cold. I mean, we're close to the snow here because like the mountains have a bunch of snow on them right now, and it's like an hour drive up to Big Bear. But I hate driving up the mountains. I hate the traffic. I feel like I'm gonna die every time I take those roads. But anyway, so West Virginia was really, really beautiful. I liked Illinois just because it was a small town. We lived in Charleston, which has like 10,000 people in it. It has like 20,000 people in it when college is in session. But I miss the small town vibe. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to head back to Texas. I have fond memories of California. I mean, I like the weather. I like that this is where all my friends are, but as an adult, I find myself ranking cities by how clean they are, how much crime there is, how easy it is to get around, how much like people complain about the traffic in Texas. And I'm like, get the fuck out of here. It's like living in Riverside, having to drive the 91, having to get on the 10 freeway or the 210. It's like, if you have a 60-mile drive, it's like, I hope you have 2.5 or 3 hours of your life to give up. It's ridiculous out here.
Yo, listen to this. This is crazy. I fill up my gas tank once a month.
So that's beautiful. That's fantastic. Yeah. You're like, why are people complaining about gas prices?
No, it's a 7-minute drive from my house to the gym we own. So it's like I drive in town. We're in a town of about 30,000 people. I don't even go to Knoxville. Like everything we need is here, 30,000. So I don't even go to Knoxville, and I'm filling up my gas tank once a month, which is amazing. But I mean, so how have you felt like this shift into your 30s? Because I know when I was in my 20s, I was like, all right, I'm going to do whatever I want, be reckless, take all the PEDs. Yeah. And now that I'm in my 30s with a family, married, have a kid, I'm like, I need to be out in the country and change my life and be more on the straight and narrow. Have you kind of found that same thing?
I have, as far as like general life stuff goes. I was reckless. I went through I could go on a talk about borderline alcoholism, influences of mental health issues and stuff that kind of runs in my family, stuff I've dealt with on my side, that I kind of mirrored straight through my 20s. I mean, there was like 7 years where I like basically don't remember. Everything kind of bleeds together just because everything was party and jumping from one social engagement to the next. And I wasted a lot of years. I think about where I could be right now if I started all of this, 8 years earlier, 10 years earlier. So now wanting to have a family, I want to wind down. However, there's kind of a flip as far as training and competing goes, because I've been competing for a pretty long fucking time. A lot of those years was as kind of a early intermediate, kind of a lower tier competitive lifter. I've only really gotten competitive in like the last 5 years. And because I spent so much time like training in the context of being hungover or like not eating right or not taking shit seriously because I was 23 and fucking stupid. Now I feel like these are the best training years of my life because I actually know what discipline is. So like if you've ever gone to like a college class and the people that go back to college when they're like 54 and you see they're in the front and they're the ones that are ruining the curve for everybody because they're taking notes and they're doing what they're supposed to do because that's what comes with all the wisdom. And that's where I feel like I'm finally at a point, even though I'm getting older, it's like, okay, now I know how to run these programs better because I've spent so much time trying to break everything down and make it digestible. And now I can actually get up when I'm supposed to get up. I can actually finish my workout without having to like bail before the last bit of accessory that I hate is done. So yeah, for life, I'm definitely like winding down, settling down, getting consistency. But once we take care of the kids thing, and I'm in this weird space too, and I'm eager to talk to you about this because I know that you've come off gear and you're running through that story arc, which I think is fantastic. I'm off right now, and then I'm having this debate in my head, like, well, once we get straightened out, I mean, what's my competitor going to look like? Am I going to go back? What things am I going to change? How long am I going to do it for? Because I'm not going to lie, like for all the trade-offs, I feel really fucking good right now. And it's almost hard to justify, jumping back in that lake. So it's like, well, I've competed, is it worth it? So I don't know. I got a lot of questions to wrestle out, but either way, I think I got a lot of good competitive years ahead of me.
Well, how long have you been off now?
I've been off. Let's see. I went off after America's Strongest Man in 2021. So that was like September. So I've been off in that time, with the exception of I did an 8-week run because I thought I was going to get ready for Worlds. I got an invite to official strongman games. It's like World's Strongest Man for the women in the weight classes, the masters divisions. We like to call it World's Strongest Man because it sounds cooler, but it's the official strongman games. So I got an invite to that. So I was getting ready. I'm like, well, if I'm going to show up, I can do a quick run, kind of do a quick and dirty prep, and it shouldn't affect my numbers that much as far as like fertility. So I did a short blast back in October of last year. And then I got COVID 2 days before we were supposed to fly out. So I've been off since then. But I'm likely going to be off the rest of this year, probably into next year. And then that's where it's like, okay, I got a decision to make.
Are you doing HCG or TRT right now?
No, I'm not on anything. I know that's it. People like to blur the lines there a lot. People say, "Oh, I'm off," and then it was like, "Oh, TRT," and it's like, "Well, doctor prescribed TRT is like 100 milligrams a week." And they're like, "Oh, I'm on like 300." They're like, "Okay, yeah, you're off right now."
Well, have you noticed your strength levels like decline big time when you came off, or do you know what your levels are at now? Like, do you know any of that stuff?
Oh yeah, it was kind of a journey because and that's also the part of being reckless. The first time in my life I'm getting like blood work done and shit because we need it for the doctor. And that's the thing they tell you to do. And you're like, yeah, no, totally. I'll get blood work. And then nobody ever does, or few people do. So I went off last year, went off the dumbest way possible, just cold turkey, after 7 years of being on a lot more than I was off. And then I was just like, fuck it, let's just jump in. And after a few months, strength levels were still pretty good. It was a drop, but my body composition, that was the biggest thing, because I was weighing about 260 at the time. And 3 or 4 months later, I was still 260, but I was a very different 260. Yes. So I was a lot fatter. I was a lot softer. So body composition changed, but my strength was still pretty good. And I actually did a contest against, there's a local contest in Austin that I did. And I wanted to go because it was against Tommy Sharp, who's a really good middleweight pro. Actually, he's competing at Clash on the Coast today, I think, which is one of the biggest middleweight strongman shows there is. And Tommy's a nasty athlete. And I'm like, I want to see how I stack up. So that was probably 5 or 6 months into being off completely. And I hung. I think he beat me by like 2 points. I think I beat him in two out of 5 events. And then we were really close on one. And then anyways. So I noticed my deadlift drop a bit. My static strength went down. Strongman's a lot of skill based. So all the years I spent getting good at moving stuff, that still transfers over pretty well. So unless it's really, really fucking heavy, I don't really notice a drop on the carrying events or the loading events, the endurance stuff. But the static strength dropped 5 to 10%, but it was still good enough to be competitive. But at that time, I'm like, God, why am I so fucking fat? Like I was even trying to get my diet dialed in a little bit. I finally got my test levels, and my free test was like, or my test levels, it was like 140. It was like, it was down there. It was in the tank. And I was like, that's funny because I feel bad necessarily. My strength is still pretty good, but my test levels are super low. And I think that there was some stuff with libido going on that explained, but also, mainly the body composition. So I actually went, the doctor prescribed Clomid, went on that, made the mistake of opening up about that on YouTube. And then you get the comments where everybody thinks they're a mad scientist when it comes to chemistry and what you should be taking. People like, oh, find a new doctor. That's not appropriate, blah, blah, blah. 3 weeks of Clomid, my test levels came back at 600. So I've been riding, kind of right in the middle of normal ever since. And I feel good. I'm a little leaner now than I was before. Strength's still doing pretty okay. Yeah, so it's a journey. There's still things to figure out, but the trade-off is that things are stable, which is nice. You're not getting those like ups and downs that come with implementing new shit or with taking stuff away and trying to cycle off, where there's so much noise. You don't know what's the training and your plan and your consistency, or what's just whatever the fuck the compounds that you're putting in your system are. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to this run where I can start like stacking things evenly again, seeing what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I noticed too, is I was just looking at it the other day. I'm like, man, my body composition from being at the same exact weight, 228 pounds. I have a picture of myself when I was on, I don't even know what I was running, but I was on gear, compared to now at 228 pounds. It's not even close. The body composition changes from being off everything compared to on are the biggest difference. You don't look anything like it. So it does make me wonder more and more when I'm like, okay, I see these natural guys with like 3D delts and like crazy muscle shape. And I'm like, I had that stuff too when I was on gear. And now it's like, I look completely different and it's not like that at all. And it makes it even harder for me to believe, where I'm like, I don't know. It just makes me question the whole narrative, because I'm like, I know the difference. I see it myself. Like, here's me natural, here's me not. And it's not even close. Same body weight. And I'm like, how am I supposed to believe that everybody who's hitting these crazy numbers and looks jacked out of their minds is clean?
It's hard. And I try not to spend too much time thinking about that, because at the end of the day, even the most obvious example of somebody who's really probably on gear, it's still best guess, because there is so much genetic variation, and the freaks of the freaks of the freaks look next level without any. I mean, I remember playing sports. I remember playing football in high school or in college, in these little kind of like subcultures of training where the stuff wasn't as, it's not to say it wasn't there, but it wasn't around the way it is now, where everybody talks about it and is open about it, whatever. Everybody knows who the jack kid on the team is, right? Everybody knows the kid that was born with abs, or the kid that's really predisposed to growing muscle. And I've seen some guys with freakish physiques who don't really train that much, who are naturally gifted athletes. I mean, those outliers can look pretty ridiculous. I know my difference between when I'm on and when I'm off, and I look like a soggy piece of tofu when I'm off. But also a big part of that is when I'm off, you would think I'd be ratcheting everything up. My diet goes to shit, training goes to shit. It's almost that psychological thing, like, well, I'm not doing it all the way. So let's just bring everything down a little bit, and I'll work a little bit harder when I know I'm going to be getting ready for a show again. And I also think about things like glycogen retention, because part of it is, it's like, you had the traps. You had those like nasty traps that you need to deadlift 900 pounds. I have my delta back have always been pretty big. I've never had any trap whatsoever, except when I'm on site. So I see what, within 3-4 weeks, they start to grow. You're like, oh shit. But then I think about like, okay, if I was never on, would my training be different? How many things would I have done to try and grow those muscles or bring up those weak points that you kind of take for granted when you're off? So the whole question kind of becomes different. And I think people that are on, especially if you were on, did you start pretty young when you were on? Like about what age did you hop on?
20 years old.
That's young-ish. I think kids are doing a lot younger nowadays, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, even that's pretty young. And that's a lot of your formative years are based around this thing that lets you to get away with so much shit. And I dabble in the kind of these natty communities because there's a lot of good channels that have come up kind of around the same time we have in the last year or two. And a lot of them are natty guys. And watching how they train. And I'm like, I got a lot of respect because a lot of them I think are hell-bent on trying to bring up those deficiencies and do what they can with what they have. And I was a strength guy, so size was secondary, but yeah, you can get away with a lot. And if you learn how to exploit it, man, there's a lot of room to like really preserve recovery and not blow yourself out doing all this other shit.
I just think like, okay, the easy way around this though, we want to see if someone's natural. As far as in the powerlifting community, feel like 1 week after your competition, your drug tested competition, let's run full labs on you. I feel like that would pretty much solve it. That would take care of the question mark on anybody. But what I've noticed is there's a big reluctancy for these guys to do blood work. They don't want to do it, which makes me kind of raise an eyebrow because I feel like with the guys I've trained, the natural clients and such, it's almost like training naturally is a slow grind. It's a slow grind. You're chipping away very slowly over time. Whereas on PEDs, it's just like the strength gains are much bigger jumps. The physique changes are much quicker. And when I see this stuff now, I'm like, it doesn't really add up. So I don't know.
Yeah. And it is quick. And I went on late. So I went on, I was 28, I think. Okay. And I started training when I was like 12 or 13. And I mean, consistently, like all through high school, all after high school, all through my 20s. Even when I was a train wreck, I was still working out regularly. So I had to get 15 years of training under my belt before I hopped on. So I have those two different modes of training very, very clearly baked into my head. I remember what it was like trying to eke out, and you'd plateau, but you wouldn't necessarily regress. And then eventually you see that little thing that bumps you up, and then it happens again. For me, and this is where I think you're an interesting case study, and I'm interested in your take on this, because hundreds of thousands of people could go on gear and not end up being Pete Rubish pulling. What would you pull? 920? Was that your biggest?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I mean, at like 245.
Yeah, I was 240 that day.
That's some alien shit. It doesn't even, you know what I mean? It like doesn't even compute. So when I think about those things, I also think about individuals' proclivity to respond to training and the gear together, because you put 100,000 people on gear, you don't get that fucking result. So then I wonder about somebody in your situation, how your experience might differ from somebody else, where I would get a boost. I would always notice a boost. You take trend within a week, you feel a little stronger, and then maybe over an entire prep, I see something a little more substantial. But I never saw those stack on top of each other in a really clear way. I would flip that card, I'd get that bump, and then it was back to like, okay, what can I do to keep growing, to use the gear to keep growing? And it always came back to my training. Like, how do I bypass this plateau? Because plateaus were always part of the issue. I get the bump, and then it's like, well, shit, what do I do now? And for most people, it's a monumental bump. The average person looks at, what let's say somebody like me does, like, well, that's a lot of weight. That's a big bump. But when I'm comparing myself to the fucking people that are out in outer space like you, it's like, man, like, am I not a responder? What's going on here? So it's crazy how much shit goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely like different levels of response from people. I think I was a higher responder than a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, it was huge jumps on, I feel like, all the lifts. And now, and even my physique, I just look at old pictures and I'm like, what in the hell? And I know, it's comparing test levels of 3,000 nanograms per deciliter to 350. So it's like, yes, that is literally 10 times higher test levels. And that's only one part of the equation. All the other hormones are at play as well. but it just really was such a substantial difference in physique and strength that I am growing. I sometimes I try to be more, you know, understanding and think maybe these guys are natural. And sometimes I'm like, I'm looking at it myself, it doesn't add up. So it goes back and forth, but I don't think everyone gets a massive response from PEDs while others do. I mean, look at freaking Jamal Browner. That guy, he was pulling insane numbers before. He was pulling 770. He's pulling 1100. Like, that's a stupid response. I mean, that's an insane bump. Like, no, most people aren't going to achieve that. So it's almost like the people who get the best response, obviously, are going to be the best guys. I mean, I would say the same thing with Shane Hunt. Again, he was pulling like low sevens, and now he's at like 1,000 almost. So that's a huge hyper responder. These are examples of hyper responders, and those are the guys who get to the very top end. Larry Wheels.
And those are guys that, I mean, look, 10 years ago, let's go to like the earlier stages of social media, take their numbers before, and everybody in the world's like, well, that guy's on. You know what I mean? Take Larry Wheels before he ever touches anything, a Shane Hunt, a Jamal Browner. They're still freaks, right? So it's hard. It's so hard to keep those standards in mind because our ideas are constantly shifting. I mean, I could talk about Jamal Browner's deadlift. I mean, that's a unique thing because it's him being strong as shit, but also having magical deadlift leverages. I mean, magical in the sense that he has I mean, you're built well for a deadlift. He's built freakishly well for a deadlift. But you can look at his bench and his squat, and they're both very, very good. I mean, there's no taking away. He's a strong fucking dude. But those are a little more grounded in what you would expect from a world-class lifter rather than it's like 1,100. What the fuck? It's like you're close to what these guys that are 440 pounds were fighting for, when $100,000 was on the line and they were the best strongman in the world. And you're a guy that could be, what's he competing in the 242s? Like, it's like, what? So there's a lot that goes into that. Yeah. But no, it's an interesting thing. I know a lot of people, and I remember when I went on, because I've been competing for about 8 years natural. When I finally went on, I was so surprised by the culture because I had all these misconceptions about it. And then you realize that everybody who's on, their favorite thing to talk about is gear. It's like training, diet, and gear. And everybody opens up. And I learned all this shit that I didn't know. One of the things that stood out, I know a lot of people on gear that look like shit. I know a lot of people on gear that aren't very strong. And that's not to make the statement that it doesn't do anything or whatever, because that's stupid. I think it just highlights the variability of responses are I think are a lot greater than most people think. But yeah, and the people that respond to it, makes up a big chunk. Definitely does.
Well, that's the big misconception. Not everyone's going to end up freak mode like Jamal's deadlift or John Hack's bench, which 600 pounds at 200 pounds. That's insane. That's just, and John was another one where I've said it many times where I was around the guy in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was like, I don't think John's natty, and he was natural. But now it's even more like just looking at people's traps and delts and all that, you can kind of get an opinion where you think it might be like that. But no, everyone is not going to respond the same to PEDs. Some guys, crazy, huge jumps. Other guys, like you said, very, marginal jumps where you're not, it's almost underwhelming. And it's so dependent on the person. We see all the crazy hyper responders. That's what we're inundated with on social media. But there's way more people who just get a very normal, small response.
Yeah, I think so. On the issue of testing, that was an interesting thing you brought up about the way to get around it. And I don't disagree with you. I feel like if there is a real serious push to try to keep certain aspects of the sport clean, I think there is a way to do it. But I'm not sure that it'll ever take just because of what the sport is. Like American Olympic lifting is known for being pretty clean, which is surprising when you think of how dirty pro-American sports have been, or like other Olympic sports have been, or all strength sports are just like dirty as shit, powerlifting, strongman, and everything else. But for whatever reason, American Olympic lifting is kind of known as being like, those are the Boy Scouts over there, and I think it has something to do with culture. I mean, I would say like tested powerlifting is pretty, I think it's better than most people think. I got into this argument on one of the videos I did recently because I kind of a statement that like, I don't think cheating is as rampant in drug tested powerlifting as people think. I think it definitely exists. I think it's there. But I think people are inclined to look at every high performer in tested powerlifting and think, well, obviously they're cheating or they're going around the rules or whatever. But anybody that's been, if you've been to a USAPL meet or you've been to an IPF meet, man, it's like going to like Wimbledon or something. It's like super proper and everybody's on edge. And most of the people, they're like aggressive types. If you're doing it there, you got you'd have to be like that guy that was trying to get away with using the slingshot in the powerlifting meet. I don't know if you saw that. He was trying to hide it under his singlet. You have to pull some sneaky shit because you'll get roasted alive if anybody catches on to that. And again, not to say it doesn't happen, but it happens. But because of what powerlifting is, it's a recreational sport. It's a hobby, something people do for fun. Even if you're world class, the likelihood of you making money off of it is low. I mean, no matter who you are, you need a social media to make money off of it. So I don't see there ever being a situation where everybody kind of signs off on having regular blood work done, because I mean, it's a really invasive thing. And for most people, I would say 90% of the competitors, it's not that serious to them. So, and that creates a problem because, it would be cool if you could really isolate the people that are following this list of rules. I'm not sure that you're ever going to get to that point with this sport.
No, you won't get to that point. I don't think the USAPL or IPF or whatever cares that much, to be honest. And then I think at the same time, I mean, it's cheap. You could get it done for $100. There's no excuses. Everybody could pay their $100, get their labs checked afterward, and we could pretty accurately depict whether or not you're natural off that. Then now the ways around it obviously would be, I talked about this with Vigorous Steve, would be taking bioidentical compounds. So you would take testosterone, obviously, and then you would also take epitestosterone. And if the ratio was still in that 4-to-1 range by taking epitestosterone and testosterone, they would not test for the synthetic metabolites. So you're good there. You could take insulin, GH, that sort of stuff. But those would be the most obvious ways. How many people are going to that trouble? Probably not a ton. But I think where it gets like people get upset about it is, whereas powerlifting itself is not a serious sport necessarily, people's pursuit of strength is serious. Everyone takes that very serious, very personal, because everyone wants to get stronger. Everybody, whether or not they even want to compete. Most of the guys I coach don't want to compete. Most of the guys who watch my channel don't want to compete. But people take strength pursuit very serious because that's like a form of self-improvement. So that's where people get upset. It's not even like, okay, powerlifting's not that serious. It's like, you're getting stronger at 3 to 5 times the rate I am. What's up with that? And that's where they take it very personal and get upset with people who are slipping through the cracks or whatever. So I think it's more like that shot on them as a person where they're like, I can't progress at the rate he can. And it's personal because it's my strength progress. And that's like a huge self-improvement pursuit. So
that's a really interesting point. Calling back to the culture of strength sports, because I do always think of testing in the context of competition, because that's really the only point where the rules matter, I guess. So when I think about people lifting outside of that, it is self-improvement. You're right. I think people should take that seriously. And that's one of the things I love about training is all of the things that kind of orbit around that with regards to self-improvement. That's what's benefited my life. That's what's given me structure and built a lot of character. That I don't think my life would be in the same spot if it wasn't for this. I'm not saying lifting weights is going to be a cure-all for the fucked up shit in your life, but if you approach it right, I think there's a lot of good lessons that's important. But you get into some weird territory there, though, because I mean, it's almost like when you talk about people, maxing in the gym or not even maxing, let's just say training, and you'll hear people give their 2 cents about what counts. What does that count as a rep? Did he do that rep right? They'll talk about form. And when you're not in the confines of a competition, there really aren't any standards. If you're training, it's what you think is going to get you better, bigger, stronger. And a lot of people have a lot of ideas about that. But at the end of the day, ideas of what counts, what doesn't really matter because nobody's keeping score. And similarly, when you're on or when you're off, I mean, if you don't compete and you're developing strength with the perception that other people are going to be rising right up to your standards, but no farther, I mean, I think that's an unrealistic expectation to have. And if I often broaden the scope out, I look at all other sports, all other avenues of life, because with gear, we talk a lot about risk. It's risky. If there was no risk, then just everybody would be taking it. But the problem is there's this incentive to do this thing where you respond and gain all this strength, but there's this downside on the other end. But I think about, look at extreme sports, look at bull riding, look at people, getting into squirrel suits and jumping off cliffs. There's a lot of really, really risky behavior that I don't want to say we condone, but we aren't as hypercritical of. And I often try to get to the bottom of why there is that animosity towards people on gear. I get the sentiment, like you said, like you're grinding and you're working and you see other people doing things to jump way past you. I don't know. I have a hard time not seeing that as kind of a weird sense of entitlement that you have the ability to dictate how far somebody else goes with their life. Because if I want to take risks, if I want to go jump, if I want to go slacklining, if I want to go free solo, El Capitan, like Alex Honnold, without any supportive gear, like if that's how far I want to go, then the risk is on me. There's always going to be people saying, yeah, but you're influencing X, Y, and Z to do it. So there's this kind of peculiar thing. There's no easy answers, and I'm not suggesting there is one, but that's just kind of where my head goes with all this.
Yeah, and the thing, I think it's the lack of transparency, because what I've seen is the natural guys who I talk to, engage with on my channel and stuff, they look up more to the untested lifters, because there's the transparency of they are untested. We know they're on stuff. That's okay. Whereas there's the lack of belief on the tested side. So it's interesting because I often see a better response when I interact with the untested guys, because that's who people look up to, even who aren't on anything. They have no desire to take anything, but they're like, we know we can believe that because they're straightforward. We know they're on stuff. And they almost prefer that over the pushback I get if I have like a top level natural tested guy on is way more than the other way around. But so I think that's part of it. It's just like they want to know the transparency is there.
So I have a question for you, because I know I monologue plenty, but this is a discussion that I have trouble wrapping my head around, because it feels like it gets almost schizophrenic with what people push towards, like what they want to see from this culture. Because on the one hand, what's all the internet stuff about? It's about fake natties. It's about doing natty or not. It's about so-and-so claims that they're natty. And then you have the internet saying, and God help you if you do have a muscle, or God help you if you are strong, because even if you happen to be natural, you're going to spend your entire life with people questioning that, which fair enough. It comes with the territory, but there's this push that's the big problem, that people aren't being transparent. People are looking at the Rock. I hear the Rock a lot. People are like, well, he should just be upfront with what he is, what he's doing. On the other hand, if everybody's transparent, I can't think of a faster way to triple the amount of people who use steroids overnight. If the Rock comes out and says, oh no, this is, what is he, 50? He's got to be pushing 50, if not into his 50s, just carved out of marble. He looks better than he did when he was 25. And if he comes out and he's like, yeah, this is my cycle, this is exactly what I do, I want to be transparent, I don't mislead anybody, you're going to get a rush of kids just absolutely slamming tests the next day. What do you think about, I guess, where kind of the integrity is? I mean, should people vie for that transparency, or do you think that people that have that influence should use and just kind of keep it on the down low?
Well, from my experience, almost with the stuff I've talked about, these videos I've made, series on stuff, and the responses I get is when I'm completely open about everything, it actually discourages a lot of people to the point where they're like, okay, I don't want to deal with all that. That's crazy. But they really love hearing about it. And I've done polls on the channel to kind of see what the community thinks. And it'll be like 90% of people don't take anything, but they freaking love hearing about it. And what I've found is guys are going to take no matter what. You can't talk them out of it. If someone comes to me, if a kid comes to me and he's 18, 20, and he wants to take something, I can't talk him out of it. He's going to take it. The only thing I can do is mitigate the damage, almost like Derek from More Plates, More Dates does, where he's like, you guys shouldn't take this, but you're going to, but this is the smart approach. Because guys are going to take it. Like when I was 20, no one could have talked me out of not doing it. And I'm like, at that point, we're going to do it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to compete with Chris Hickson. I wanted to hang with him. I saw what he was doing, and I was going to do it. So it's almost more like steering people as far as do it the right way, do this, don't do the crazy shit that we've done. It's more of that route. So I'll even make these videos like you're talking about trend, and everyone's like, damn, dude, I don't want to do that. And almost being open in a sense, but we're not a celebrity figure. And that's where you could draw the line, because The Rock, it could be a different story. That's a much more general population that has no knowledge of lifting and such. So they might be more willing to jump on. But our kind of community, they're pretty well educated. They're not just going to be like, okay, he does it, so I'm going to. So it's almost the opposite. But I think in a celebrity role, you're spot on.
It's almost like that difference between abstinence or teaching sex ed. It's like you're trying to prevent this negative outcome of people not going on that and dealing with those consequences that you think they shouldn't have to deal with because they're not in a position where they should be going on. But if you go too far, if you take this zero tolerance approach, you almost end up doing more damage. So that's really interesting. I tend to agree with you. I think the transparency, and if people are really, really open the way you've been, the way I am, I try to walk this weird line because I want to be open about it. I've never denied it. When I went on, I was like, I'm never ever going to lie to somebody if they ask me about this. Just I can't do it knowing that I have to have it hidden away in my backpack and nobody can ever know or see it or whatever. I had to know why I was doing it. There had to be a principle and I had to be able to defend it. So thankfully I've been able to do that. But as my channel reaches more people, I don't want that to be the main theme because it's easy for the channel to just be about gear use, and it can often go it can go in a productive way, like you and Derek from More Plates, More Dates. But my experience with the comments is it really quickly devolves into this kind of shit show, and it's a distraction. And I wanted my stuff to specifically be about, programming or whatever. So I try to be open about it, but it's this weird line I try to walk because every time I make a video about it, every time I talk about it, the comments just evolve into a shit show. The feedback's kind of weird. So it's really a tricky thing to handle. I've never been able to wrap my head around the people that pull for full transparency while also talking about unrealistic expectations. Because one of the things I always hear is that you get guys, let's say like a Mike O'Hearn, somebody that everybody thinks is on gear, probably is, and is very adamant that he isn't. And everybody says, well, that sets out standards for people that are coming into it. And I think, what does that say about the people coming into it? If they look at a Mike O'Hearn and they think, I want to be like that, and their assumption is that he's natural and I'm natural, so that I'm going to be able to look like Mike O'Hearn, I don't follow the process. Whereas if you're The Rock and you tell everybody that you're on, the assumption is that everybody's going to be one steroid cycle away from looking like The Rock, or that if they just keep their life, you know what I mean? It's like you can't get, when you're talking about outliers, you can't get away from the unrealistic expectations. And I don't concern myself with trying to onboard people based on promises that they're going to be world class, because all they do is look at world class people on Instagram. I think there's got to be something has to go back to the earth, as far as you train because it's good for you, because you enjoy it, because you're going to be better than you were before. And I think there's a lot of good stuff to take away that doesn't get hit a lot in any of the discussions.
Yeah, I think, that's why we all started lifting, was we felt better, we enjoyed it, but it's almost turned into this thing where it's like showing off what you can do on social media to an extent, not for everybody, but it's lost some of its purity as far as that, where I think that has helped grow the sport, but people might not be necessarily in it for the right reasons. Whereas 10 years ago, you could only be in it for the right reasons. So that's where sometimes I'll see where people have that nostalgic feel and they're like, oh, I wish it was still like the old days, instead of the days of like Instagram that kind of ushered in that whole side of things. But yeah, at the end of the day, we all do it for enjoyment. We all enjoy the feeling of either getting stronger, getting bigger, seeing our physique transform, and that's what it's all about. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And, anytime I can tell somebody to reorient their expectations, I think that's just as much. Like, yeah, you want to see yourself objectively move forward, but having expectations of what you're going to get out of it, I think, is really big. And I don't think there's enough discussion about that here. I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk to you about programming wizardry or technique, because you were one of the best deadlifters of all time with some of the feats you put up. And I try to take advantage of every opportunity I get like this. I'm interested to know some of your approaches And if do you, I know that you're chasing a bigger deadlift now. Like you've been back to pulling, you've gotten back over 700. Do you use some of the same approaches now that you were using back in the day, or do you find that your body doesn't respond the same?
It's completely different now because, like you said, when you are natural, you have to dial in everything to a T. You have to get everything, all your ducks in a row to maximize the progress. Whereas there were so many things I could get away with, so many mistakes I could get away with on gear that all that became somewhat obsolete as far as having perfect program. I mean, the early days where there was no structure, it was go in the gym and lift as heavy as possible every Friday. Say Friday's deadlift day, we're going to max out on something, do something crazy, and then do 3 hours of volume work. So it was just this massive inundation of volume. And there were times on trend where I could get away with deadlifting heavy upwards of 3 times a week. It's the most taxing, and these were all pulls in the 700 range multiple days. And it's like deadlift is such a taxing lift, whereas now as a natural athlete, you want to keep the volume lower, maybe one to 2 days a week. You want to push squats a little higher. So I'd have to up my squat frequency now. Bench frequency has to be much higher now. So these kind of things like are what I found. Whereas when I'm on gear, it's like you can get away with everything. You can train for 6 hours, train 4 days a week, go as heavy as possible. And well, you still get some CNS fatigue, obviously, and kind of run yourself down that way. The actual physical element of it, your body can hold up. So that's changed quite a bit, where it's like I've worked with so many guys and I've had to make so many changes myself to where I've kind of dialed in certain principles that work better for me and for my guys from what I've seen. But when you're on gear, you can just, I felt like I could get away with a lot of mistakes.
And then there's the frequency issue, which I'm experimenting with, because I've always been a low frequency guy. Mainly because I was predisposed to overuse issues and like inflammation. So if I squat too many days in a row, my knees and hips hurt. If I press too many days in a row, my shoulders start acting up, like weird shit like that. So I've always had to bias towards high frequency or low frequency, because I was like stringing together workouts by the skin of my teeth, where it's like, how long do I have to wait before my joints feel good again or whatever? But recently I've noticed being off, is way down, and I actually feel better than I did maybe 6 or 8 years ago. I used to cringe, dude, getting out of a car. If I had to be in my wife's sedan and I had to get out, I looked like I was 75 fucking years old. I used to hesitate to get up on curbs, to walk upstairs, simple shit. Warming up with an empty barbell would cause like physical pain until I had enough Voltaren rubbed on me that I felt okay. So anyways, now that I feel good, I'm trying to experiment with more frequency and do some of the things that you said, that to my pressing in a way that I've never done before, and my deadlifts I've never done before. The thing that I keep bumping up against is effort, because you were known for being kind of a maniac when it came to like aggression and pulling. I mean, you were doing that on just about every deadlift session, or even back then, did you have a way of like, well, this is going to be an easier day, or this is going to be some token volume, or were you like just, oh, we're doing 5, so I'm gonna do the heaviest fucking 5 I can do?
That was the thing. There was no balancing act as far as the aggression. Every session was max aggression. So I don't know how I sustained that. Truthfully, I know like Tren is obviously a potent CNS stimulant and you get really strong, but even like people don't realize, before all the PEDs in my basement, a lot of those videos, I was still on nothing, and I had it in me then. Like I was just balls to the wall, going to go freaking crazy and 100% maximize my CNS every single time I trained. It wasn't calculated out. Now I was exhausted pretty much every day outside of the gym because I was burning myself out so hard, destroying my CNS day in and day out. I was taking massive amounts of stimulants. Like I was taking jacked like crazy caffeine. And then once I got on stuff, I added in like Clen with it to be an extra boost. And it was crazy. So the CNS stimulation was insane, to where it would just wear me out and I would be almost useless the rest of the day. But every session was that intensity, even if it was like a pause deadlift, a heavy deadlift, a high rep set of deadlifts. It was jack the music up as loud as possible, get freaking hyped up. Like that was all the time. And that's completely unsustainable for me now. I can't even get hyped up. Like people ask, I'm like, I can't get hyped up at all anymore, which is somewhat depressing, but it's just a different age. I'm like, I can't get that aggression. I can't do it. It's not there.
Yeah, and I mean, when you burn the candle at both ends for so long, there's no such thing as a free cookie. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna hit that button over and over and over, eventually you just get numb to it. It's like any other form of stimulation. And it's also crazy to think that the thing that works so well for you and for so many other people, and I think it works for everybody in very, very confined areas. Like if it's just for a temporary period of time, or if it's just at one phase of their training, but that carried you all the way through to these like world-class numbers where that would like chew so many people up. I thought a lot about what allows somebody to pull heavy very frequently and get a good result, regardless of even if they're on gear. Because I mean, I was on gear for a while, and at my highest doses, I couldn't have done that because there were certain things. It's not just like, am I gonna over time get stronger? It's like workout to workout, I would see my numbers start to drop off, and it's like, I'm on 500 tests, 300 tren, and whatever orals got sprinkled into the mix like they were fucking Tic Tacs, and it's like my deadlift is down week to week. What's going on? I would always have to look at it from this perspective, like preserving energy, or I guess recovery enough that I could see those numbers carry over to the next week. And I had to do some elaborate shit. Now, part of it I look at leverages a lot because I think that has a huge impact on how your body receives the stress. So I'm built like a dachshund. Like I'm a lot of torso, and I got little stumpy legs and arms. So great for pressing and squatting. Fantastic and it's one of the reasons I've always been a good overhead presser early on. But God, for deadlift, it was like every pull is like a deficit pull. My lower back, having a weak midsection just exponentially increased the amount of stress my low back had to take. So even now, as I'm running it, I'm not kidding. I'm doing like triples with like 65% on like some of my days, trying to balance this frequency, and it still feels like too much. And then it's like, okay, how much of that is my shitty leverages? How much of it is that I'm not tolerated, that I haven't built a tolerance to it, and how much of it is other injuries and shit I've accumulated. It's a mess. It's a mess to try to weigh out all this shit, especially talking to somebody like you. You said you had that rivalry with Hickson. I remember Hickson from posting in the forums back in the day. He trained much the same way, yeah.
Yeah, and so one point before that is it's interesting to note. I should have made note of this. Like I'm the opposite, so I could deadlift very high frequency, but I would barely squat. I had a meet prep going into a meet where I think it was going into a 772 squat that I hit in the meet, 350 kilos, and I squatted twice, and then just working up to singles in that whole 16 weeks. Like I had 2 squat days working up to a single and did no other leg training and just deadlifted because my body didn't like squats. So I could just literally get my low back so strong off deadlifts that it would carry my squat, even though my quads were tiny. It was kind of crazy. I would just low back entirely on squat, barely train squat. Bench frequency was low. So it was the opposite of you. Like bench and squat were crap. They didn't feel good, but deadlift felt great. So it was just the opposite situation. But Hickson, exact same way. Hickson was a rival, but a friend. We were rivals and we were friends. Like we wanted to compete. When we would lift together, we were competing. I wanted to just pull every rep faster than he would pull it, and he wanted to do the same. And it was just always like that. It was always max intensity, max volume on the music to where you couldn't hear anything else. Take a bunch of drugs before, ammonia. It was everything was a competition. So I got into this training atmosphere where every session was like a competition. Now I wasn't around him all the time, but I would still see his videos and stuff, and everything was always a competition. Whereas now I don't really have that. I'm like by myself.
So I was going to ask if you thought that's why one of the reasons why aggression is different from back then versus now is being outside of that competitive environment where you're chomping away trying to keep up with this rival.
That's part of it. I think the other parts of it are obviously the test levels are so low right now that it's hard to get amped up. I do think that's a huge part of it. Now, I could never get, even with 1200 test level, I couldn't get quite as amped in the later years. So what I found out was, this is the catch-22, guys. This is what I found out. It's like, as you become more successful as a lifter, you gain more notoriety, the hunger wanes, okay? And I couldn't get the intensity and hunger and aggression that I had in the early years when I was unknown and I was coming up and people would talk shit to me online. And once it's all success and like people complimenting you and you've kind of made it, the hunger as much isn't there. It's like it's gone and you're not going to get it back. And that was a big component of it as well. And life, like you start having a serious girlfriend and a wife, and then you start getting into actually like life. Because when I was in my peak lifting years, that was life. Life was lifting. There wasn't anything else. I was not balanced. I did not have success necessarily outside of the gym. Like my life was in disarray. But once I like finally got out of that shell and was like, okay, I need to be a grown up now, it was hard to have that same aggression and seriousness.
Yeah, being elite at anything does generally not go hand in hand with having a well-balanced life. I feel like that's a pretty common truism. And I experienced very much the same thing. In fact, there's this thing in strongman. I don't know how much it applies to some of the higher guys. I've seen it in the open class. I know guys that have kind of broken through and then faded away. But for a long time, weight class, they would call it curse of the middleweight pro card, because you get these insane 105 kilogram guys that were like up and coming. They were supposed to be the next big thing, and they'd get their pro card and then they just never compete again. Because once you have that thing that says like, okay, you've made it, you're legitimized, you've achieved what you set out to do. Now you're on the top of the mountain. What is the thing that keeps you pushing farther? You're like, I'm already on top of the mountain. Like I'm already known as that guy. I already have that feather in my cap. Why keep pushing? Why keep killing myself? And there very much is that antagonistic pressure that comes from being unknown, from having a fucking chip on your shoulder, from working through all of your stuff. And then when you're surrounded with people patting you on the head, telling you how good you are, that, oh my God, that takes the wind out of the sails. It's one of the things that I struggle with now, because I'm in a spot in my life I do not deserve to be in. I have to stop and express gratitude every day. I mean, move the house I have, my wife, the life I live, the amount of comfort I have, the amount of access to amenities I have. Like I live a very fucking cushion life. It is really, really difficult to infuse the type of work ethic or to remind yourself to keep your foot on the gas when everything is so easy. And I think that applies to training and to life. It's like if I wanted to write some magnum opus, if I wanted to like make some great piece of art or some work that I was going to hang my hat off, I swear to God, I'd have to get divorced. I'd have to like live in a shack, somewhere in the middle of nowhere and live off of top ramen and sleep on the concrete floor to get myself in a state where I could push those things out. Because it feels like, and maybe that's a personality thing that some people, maybe that are wired a little bit like us, share. But I swear to God, like those big meteoric rises, those big jumps you make, they're so much easier when you have nothing and you're fighting against everything. A fire inside you. But yeah, that gets stolen away pretty quick.
You nailed it, because it seems like the more stable and comfortable almost, which is a bad word, but my life gets, the harder it is to train with that same intensity. It's just not there, because it's like, okay, I'm actually a grown-up now. I'm 32 almost, and I have a kid and I have a wife and I have bills to pay. And I have responsibilities and I have a lot of work to do every day. And it's like lifting, I can't train for 4 hours anymore. I can't do things completely in almost a selfish manner. So it's that tough balance, which is why maybe, in your 20s is the time to kind of go for that kind of stuff. And then you got to kind of mellow out. And I feel like it's just being responsible. It's like, I can't keep blasting gear and going for records and spending 4 hours training and neglect my family and might kill my health and all this kind of stuff. It's like I have to do that responsibly. Like I wouldn't be a good husband, good father, good person if I was like, all right, I'm going to keep competing and trying to go for 2,200 and take all the trend and my life's in disarray again. It's like, you can't do that anymore. You got to grow up at some point. So that's almost where I'm at now, and I'm at peace with it.
Oh, you should be. I think that's the enlightened way to approach it. And I think that's an important message in the era of social media, where everybody is exposed to the biggest performers of all time in their feed, and they just scroll through. And it's 2,000 pound totals don't mean anything. You don't have a 2,000 pound total. It's like people ask me what I lift. I have to like shy away from it, because I'm going to give myself away. They're going to be like, why do you have an opinion? You don't. you don't have a 550 bench, you don't have an 800 pull, and everybody's standards are so skewed. And I think that can be really toxic on the individual level, because the people that are setting standards for themselves, they do have this expectation where, well, if you got to do it, you got to do it to the nth degree, where out of millions and millions of people lifting, only a few can become the best. In fact, only dozens can become really, really, really good. For everybody else, there has to be a purpose for you that you are aware of. And it goes back to like, okay, there's still a point to doing this, even if you're not going to be a world record holder, even if you're not going to, go sweep nationals, because virtually all of you will not do that. So what do you take out of it, and how do you balance out with the rest of your life? It's so different than the super high performers that are like the titans of industry, CEOs of Forbes 500 companies, the people that for as much as it's easy to like throw shade at billionaires or whatever, generally when you look at the people that are in those positions, you're talking about life stress being insane. You're talking about people that sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. You're talking about people that live and breathe, all the other shit you can talk about, the social commentary, political commentary. I'm not even saying anything about that. It's just, to live that type of life, you have to live that. You can't have a family. You can't be around your kids. You can't be a good dad. If your entire life is for that peak pinnacle of excellence, then you have to sacrifice everything else. And that's the obvious trade-off. You can't show me somebody who's worth, a certain degree of wealth, hundreds of millions of dollars, who runs these industries, who has a well-balanced life. It doesn't exist. It's the same thing with people that rev the engine nonstop in pop culture, whether they're actors or musicians. And same thing with athletes that are dying. Man, did you watch the Michael Jordan documentary? Did you see, was it The Last Dance on Netflix?
I never watched it. I know about it. I never saw it.
I'm not a basketball fan at all. I'm generally not a sports fan, but the psychological insight into what goes into being the greatest, even if you have the talent, even if you were born, light from heaven shined on you when you were born, saying you're going to be one of the best basketball players ever do it. The mindset, way this human being lived his life and prioritized winning over everything else, you don't get that level without this huge cost. So going back to what you were saying, I think you have a very mature, enlightened message that I think people need to hear. It's like, you can do this in a way that your kids are going to see, like, oh, daddy trains, daddy's strong. Your kids don't care if you have a 2200 or the eulogy isn't going to be like, oh, right before he died, he hit that 10-pound PR that really like just set him apart. Nobody gives a shit. But if you show your kids and everybody around you, not just your kids, but your social network that you influence, what it's like to have a steady workman-like life where you incorporate really important things to kind of have this holistic greatness. It's not that you're the best at any one thing, but it's that generally you have a well-rounded life, that you stayed the course and you chipped away and you spread the message of hard, consistent work. I mean, I think that's like the best thing that you can do. And I don't think that message gets spread around enough.
Yeah. I don't think people realize either, like you were saying, that the cost it takes to be in certain positions, because there's people with like a lot more money or better, things than I have. But I'm like, do I want to do all the things they do and then deal with all that stress and travel as much as they have to for business or whatever? I'm like, not really. I wouldn't want to deal with that. I have a pretty good life as it is. It's not too stressful. And you got to weigh these costs. So even, for everything, there's a cost benefit analysis. You got to say that for anything in life. And I think I'm seeing that more and more. And especially the thing where it's like, we got to appreciate what we have in the present. And we can't always just be looking towards the future, because that's something I've struggled with so much, where I would have a big goal, say let's a 950-pound deadlift, and I never got there. But let's say that was the goal. Well, I would almost like try to fast forward through all that time training up to it to try to get to that point. And then you just watched all that time go by, where instead of really trying to take it in as like life is a continuous journey, you're never going to get this day back. You're never going to get the past back. You got to acknowledge the present every day. Literally make a note every day to acknowledge the present day, the present moment, what you're going to do today. Appreciate the little things. And that's what's going to make you happier in the long run.
When you think about the biggest numbers you've ever hit, it's like for every one of those memories, you have hundreds of memories of the training sessions, of the journey, right? Of the people you knew, of the rivalries you had. And that creates the depth of that time in your life. And I think that's absolutely true, to remind yourself to be aware and be present, and to keep the important things in mind. And it's funny because I'm known as a choke artist. I'm a massive choke artist. So the biggest associate with making a mistake or shitting the bed or having something go wrong. But I still have such love for what I do, because I love to train. I love to track the progress. I love to see, it's like, okay, a contest didn't go well, but I know what I did from point A to point B. I know how to get, how to get better. And I actually love the feeling of stressing myself. I love the feeling of training. It makes the rest of my life go better. I have an outlet for anxiety and aggression, and it all works really well. But no, I think that's a huge point. And I would say that if anybody can start their day with a basic amount of gratitude for what they do have, knowing that no matter how many people stand above you, there's always a lot of people below you that you can look down to and say, I have it better than so-and-so. It's like, I have earth under my feet. I have air in my lungs. I have a brain, 2 arms and 2 legs, and I have the ability to go out and do that people have. You can find a mindset that I think is more conducive to being not just happy, but actually productive, without having all the baggage that goes along with hyper productivity, like we're talking about. If I said it before, if I had to write a book about like anything self-help, it would be reminding people that to really be great at something, it's not doing what you see on social media. It's not doing what you see in pop culture. If you take your immediate sphere of people, it's like, how many people do you talk to on a day-to-day basis? Like a few dozen? I talk to like 3. It's like my dogs, my wife, and the person who checks me out at the HEB. But your immediate sphere of influence, it doesn't take a lot to be the strong guy, right? I mean, if you bench press 275 in any group you go to, you're probably one of the strong guys. It doesn't take a lot to be the history buff, or it doesn't take a lot to be the person that knows how to fix shit. Out of your immediate sphere of influence, anybody can be great, in the sense that people know you apart and give you that purpose and direction. And it generally just requires fostering a skill the way you would foster anything else, and taking it seriously and enjoying it, and not killing yourself. So yeah, when I do, and this kind of circles all the way back to the natty debate. It's like when you're trying to influence people to not pump a bunch of hormones into their body because they want to look like their favorite IG lifter. It's like, you have to ask yourself every time, why am I doing this? What do I want out of this? Do I want to post another squat video on Instagram? Like just another thing to scroll past that's meaningful to you, but nobody else? Or do you want to be able to impact people around you? And the barrier for doing that is not only more fulfilling, that action is more fulfilling, but the barrier is much, much lower.
That makes a lot of sense. It's just the thought of, what do you want to focus on? What do you want to spend your time and energy on? All that sort of thing. Now, like for you, for Alexander Bromley, what does your future look like? What are your future goals? Not just lifting, but life, channel, whatever. Like, what do you want? What do you see in the future for yourself?
So it's kind of this new frontier I'm in, because in the last year and a half, I ended up in a new spot when I started doing YouTube. I wanted it to take off like everybody does. I had no idea that it would the way it did. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, met a lot of great people I followed for a long time, such as yourself, people that I never thought I'd be able to talk to in this capacity. So it's been nothing start, which I'm very fortunate for, because I'm not sure I would have stuck with it if I didn't. But during COVID was some of my biggest growth in that space, because me and my wife were locked inside all day. We were in a 1-bedroom apartment, just me, her, and our 2 dogs. And she would be doing conference calls and working remotely from the kitchen. And I'd be in our bedroom with the tripod on the bed, filming in front of the TV, like, in a space that's like this big. So to be able to do as much as, it's like I have an office that was about as big as our apartment. I have room and time to do things. I have more equipment. So now it's this new competitive journey I'm going into, because I try to bring it back to that competitiveness. What greatness do I want to achieve that I think is within my grasp, that I think will make myself and my family better off for? So I take YouTube competitively. I take social media competitively. Like, I want to continue putting out really, really good information, that it's not just that it gets clicks, but it helps people in a specific way, in an actionable way. So I'm always going back and evaluating from that. So my goal is to just own the YouTube algorithm just to dominate it. I want a bigger channel. I want a bigger following because I believe that I have the capacity to help people out with problems that they might resonate with or might need some insight with. And if I have that, then obviously I want as many people to be exposed to that as possible. And I think that'll expose people to discussions like actually influence popular lifting culture for the better. So you don't get people glorifying, trenbolone use in 19-year-olds. So you don't get people treating SARMs like they're a cost-free way of getting your numbers up. And I think it'll attach people to better training methodologies. So in the next, 5 years, I'm just looking at really doubling down in my content production. I just changed my format and it's paid off immensely. So that's I'm seeing right now. So I'm going to keep that going. I have a couple of things I want to write. I do want to get back into competing. It's unfortunate, but one of the biggest things I could do to bump my following would just be to get fucking jacked. Like if I had, 9% body fat, I wouldn't have to do anything else. And it's like your following immediately grows just from the aesthetics. And that's something I've always put on the back burner. So that is on my to-do list to not look like a human thumb. And just keep cycling through day. Hopefully within the next year, I'll be back to competing on the level that I'm used to. And that's going to take some easing back into. I'm going to have to approach my training a little bit differently for that, I think. But I'm really hopeful. I was competitive before I ever went on gear, obviously to a lesser extent. But I'm hopeful that I will be able to get a lot of mileage out of this and keep that going. So that's really it. It's just more content. Hopefully having kids doesn't shoot me in the foot. And I have to deal with these little rugrats taking all my time and attention. But, that's a gamble I'm willing to make. And then that's it. And then, we'll see where I'm at in 10 years.
Do you like the long-term content, the long-form content more?
It's different. It's a trade-off. And in the beginning, I was just doing what I thought a reasonable lecture would be. It's like, I have this thing I want to talk about. Really well off visual cues. So I would do a lot of drawings, a lot of graphs. People responded to that. And everything ended up between, 12 to at the high end, like 20 minutes, if I really had something to go off on. And that seemed to be about the right time. But it wasn't until probably a year or so ago, I really started experimenting with the type of the content, the type of the format. A couple months ago, I was doing daily stuff. So it was short videos every single day. I can come up with a video every day. I can come up with a topic, talk about. You can talk about them very broadly, or you can focus down on really minute, small, granular details. And I can do that. I can keep that up. And I did it for 2 months and I tripled my viewership. But it was also a little draining. And I didn't feel like I was doing as good of a job communicating because you're limited. And there isn't this linear, I think in terms of like chapters and textbooks, like when I explain something, I want to start at the beginning and I want to go along the way. And I want to get on all the tangents and paint a really full picture. You can't do that on YouTube because nobody's watching from the beginning all the way through. It's very nonlinear. It's very disorganized. So the content, I think, is almost better off if it plays into that. So then I switched to long form. So these are like 35-minute long videos that take me a week and a half to put together because I have to write them. So scripting them, it allows me to think about it a little more thoroughly. I can engage with the subject matter a little bit better over the time and better ways to structure it. So communication's better. And it's punchier, which is huge. If you want people to watch your shit on YouTube, I mean, you got to think it's like a trailer for an action movie, right? There's a cut every half second, right? You'll never see more than 2 seconds of the same scene strung together because that's what keeps your attention in trailers. So the videos are kind of the same thing. Now, people play into that by being goofy and stupid, and you can do it that way. I just found that if I keep up with it, I can write it out and have it be a little more choppy. But it's the editing, it's putting in the B-roll, all the clips, all the visual stuff takes forever. But honestly, I like it. I like the process. I like spending more time on one topic. I think I can reach more people that way. I think I can be a little bit more insightful. I can cover more things in one video, and people are more likely to stick around for the whole thing. So that's what I've been doing that's paid off immensely in the last month. I mean, everything's just paid off immensely. And for as much as people talk shit about the you're servicing the most amount of people, because there's no bones about it. You know, I can make the 5% of diehard fans happy by doing this, or I can make a couple changes and the umbrella widens and now you have more people hearing essentially the same information.
Well, I'd say you're definitely doing it the right way because you're one of the most respected people. People love your content. It's obvious the quality. The
Appreciate
quality
that.
has gone up immensely. Your channel's exploded. I mean, I remember like, God, it was not even 6 months ago. I don't even know where you were at, but, and then I looked and it's like, you're at 100. I was like, holy shit, you know? Jeffrey Schofield, he's the same kind of thing. He's had the same trajectory where he's blown up recently. So
he passed me up. Yeah.
do you think, I mean, I think that's just a testament to the consistency that you guys had. You guys have been consistent with trying to produce high quality content where you're not clickbaiting people and you're not BSing people. And you've been trying to do that consistently for years. And now you're seeing this huge explosion. So I think, doesn't it just come down to consistency?
It completely, yeah. It's It's like training, honestly. It's consistency in the context of paying attention and making changes as needed, not being too married to one way of doing things. And that also is you'll have lulls, because if you experiment, you know, you might find a run of things that don't work. And that's wasted months where you're stagnant or you're declining. So you have to be patient, you have to be consistent, but you find what works for you and your brand and your model. And what I've done is put the message. It's almost like if I'm training somebody in person, there's things I want them to know. I know how I struggled. I'm kind of a mediocre athlete who tried really hard to get good. So I relate to a lot of the problems people have. And as long as I'm putting that at the forefront, you know, it gets a good result. So it was consistent upload frequency, consistently listening to feedback. And then I watched Jeff at the start. Jeff had like half the following that I did. When I was at 20, I think he was at 10 and he passed me up. And that's where I say, like, I get competitive in these things because I really like Jeff. I have a lot of respect for him and his content. But I saw him pass me up. I'm like, motherfucker. Like, that's what I'm like. I got to go back. And I'm like, what is he doing that I'm not? What topics is he discussing? Is it the humor? Is it his audience, how he speaks his audience is a slightly different group of people. But I really enjoy that about it. I enjoy and I can look at what other people are doing and I can really fight to keep my head above water to that point. But I mean, anybody that's looking to like get into this realm, if you are looking at being successful, this is the advice you'll get any multi-level marketing course or any like make money online course you would ever pay for. It's the same thing. Find a niche, you know, don't make videos about nothing. Don't follow yourself around the house with a camera thinking anybody's going to give a shit about, you know, how you play with your do everything. Don't do political commentary. Don't do things that are super saturated that everybody's doing that's too broad. Find a niche, find something small that you have a little bit of authority in. Doesn't even have to be a lot. Research it, figure out what people are talking about, make videos about that. If you can solve problems in a small niche, you will get a following very, very quickly. And then you'll be able to look at what other people are doing. You'll be able to set your sights a little bit higher and climb up over time. And that's really what it is. So if you love explaining shit to people, hear myself talk, obviously. And if you have a good way of making things complex a little bit more simple, there's a place for you in this space, and the rest is easy. Now, for what's coming next, I talked to Zach Tellender about this. I had the privilege of interviewing him last year, and Zach is very much in that vein. He's roommates with Chris Williamson, who does a Modern Wisdom podcast, who's interviewed some of the most well. I think he interviewed Goggins actually not that long ago. Zach seems to conquering the algorithm to beating YouTube. And he was talking about it. He's like, I've just had linear growth consistently for as long as I've been doing it. And I look at that and I'm like, that's great, because most people get no growth. Most people get stagnant. So to have linear growth, that says you're doing something right. But then I think one step above that, and I'm like, yeah, linear growth, it's going to take you 15 years to get to 1 million subs. So how do people beat that? How do people get the exponential growth? And that's what, it's the same thing. Am I satisfied with my 500-pound deadlift, or do I want to chase Pete 920 you know, as a featherweight? So that's what's keeping me engaged, really.
No, that's awesome. I know it's chipping away, and then at some point you get the exponential growth. So Chris Williamson talked about that, where he's like, 5 years it was barely growing, it was growing slow, and then all of a sudden it just started popping like this, and now we're going from this for 5 years to this. So I think that'll happen with you, and we're starting to see that because even you and Jeff, it's started to kind of explode up. And then maybe when you get to that 200, 250K, it'll be a bigger jump, which we saw with Derek. He like doubled his following from, 400 to like 1 million in 8-9 months, something like that. So
Jeez.
I think,
yeah, fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed.
yeah, no, I think we'll wrap up there. I don't want to make it too much longer, but I appreciate having you on, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thanks
We'll
for
do this
having
again
me,
for
man.
sure.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely. Anytime.
Hold on one sec.